Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Scary Delivery, submitted by Tabbycat. I still have the screenshots. I don't know why I keep them. Maybe to prove to myself it really happened. And maybe to remind myself that I wasn't imagining the way the snow swallowed sound that night, or the way this guy's hand tightened around my wrist. It was December 22nd, 2023, 3 days before Christmas. I was door dashing to cover the last of my rent and buy presents for my little brother. The snowstorm had rolled in fast that afternoon, with thick wet flakes that turned into wind-whipping sheets by evening. Most drivers had logged off, but man, the surge pay was fucking insane. That's why I stayed out. By 9:30, the roads were nearly empty. The streetlights were glowing through the halos of the snowfall, and the town looked abandoned, and I remember thinking how quiet everything felt. Well, the order that I got came through just after 9:47. It was a large combo meal. 2 burgers, extra fries, and 2 chocolate shakes. The pickup was from a fast food place in town, and the delivery address was on the edge of town. And I knew that street. It was technically inside town limits, but it ran along the wooded outskirts. Old farmhouses, long driveways, stretches without streetlights. The customer name was M. Sullivan. Nothing strange about that, I thought, but there was something strange about the instructions. Please bring to front door. Do not leave outside. I will meet you. And that was it. The drive took me about 15 minutes because of the storm, and snow was clinging to my windshield, even with the wipers going full speed. My tires would slip every once in a while, but I was in my trusty Subaru, so the driving wasn't so bad. The further I got from the main road, the darker it became, and the houses were farther and farther apart. Then I noticed the street I had to go down hadn't been plowed yet. I made the turn, determined to make the delivery, and my GPS voice sounded really loud in the silence. Your destination is on the right. I'd almost missed it. There was no porch light on. No Christmas lights, just a dark 2-story house set back from the road. The driveway was barely visible under the snow. There weren't any tire tracks except what looked like older, half-covered ones. I started to make the drive up the driveway, and I texted through the app, "Hi, I'm here." 3 dots appeared immediately. "I see you." For some reason, my stomach dropped. I hadn't seen anyone in the windows, and there was certainly no one at the door. I grabbed the food and stepped out, the snow hitting my face sideways. The snow was reaching over my boots as I walked up to the porch, and halfway to the door, though, I noticed something else that was strange. There were no footprints on the porch. Not fresh ones, not any older ones. It was just a smooth, untouched layer of snow. Before I could even process that, the front door opened. No light came from inside, but I could see a guy standing there. He was tall and thin, his face was shadowed, but I could see pale skin and dark, deep-set eyes. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a long-sleeved shirt. "You're late," he said. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. Come on, man, the roads are really bad. He didn't respond. Instead, he looked at me in a way that made my skin kind of prickle, like he was trying to memorize my face or something. I held out the bag. "Order for M. Sullivan?" He didn't reach for it. He just said, "Come inside." I laughed a little bit and said, "I'm not allowed to. I'll just hand it off here." And then he stepped forward, and that's when I realized something else. There was no heat coming from the house, no warm air escaping into the cold, and just this darkness behind him. "It's warmer in here," he said, "and you look frozen." "No, I'm fine," I said quickly. And before I could do anything, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. "Get inside," he said. I pulled back, but his grip tightened, and that's when I heard something behind me. Crunching footsteps in the snow. I turned my head, and out of the white curtain of the storm, I saw a figure walking towards us, then really walking fast. It was a woman. I hadn't seen her outside when I parked. She was wearing a long coat and no hat. She looked straight at me and then picked up the pace. And for a second, relief flooded over me, thinking that she would be helping me. Maybe she lived here. Maybe this was normal for this guy and he just didn't know what he was doing. But then she spoke, saying, "Get her inside." My stomach twisted. The man's fingers dug harder into my wrist and the woman's eyes locked into mine. They were creepy as hell, unblinking and just wrong. There was something empty there. There wasn't any anger or excitement or anything. It was just this weird look of anticipation. She reached us struggling and placed her hands on my back and started to push. "Don't make this difficult," she said softly. That's when my brain just went white with panic. I dropped the food and I twisted around as hard as I could and started screaming. The man's nails were scraping across my skin as I wrenched my arm free, and the woman tried to shove me hard between my shoulder blades, forcing me forward, trying to push me into the doorway. I stumbled a little bit, but didn't fall. Something primal kicked in. I spun around and slammed my elbow backward into her chest, and she grunted in surprise. I could tell the man was lunging at me again, but his foot slipped on the snow-covered porch, and he fell on his ass. And that was it. I ran. I don't remember feeling the snow or the cold. I just remember the sound of my boots pounding against packed ice and my lungs burning. Behind me, I couldn't hear anything over the storm. And I guess that was creepy too, not knowing if they were following me. I reached my car and jumped in, thankful I had left it running. I looked up. They were standing at the edge of the driveway, maybe 20 feet away, side by side, just watching me. It was creepy as hell as I saw them just standing there with the snow swirling around them. They didn't do anything. They didn't yell. They didn't shout. They didn't chase after me. They just stood there. I reversed as quick as I could, fishtailed it back onto the road, and didn't take another look back. I drove until I hit the main road, and only then did I pull over into a gas station parking lot, shaking so badly I couldn't hold my phone steady. I reported the delivery as unsafe in the app, and within minutes I got a notification. Order canceled. Canceled? After I had already arrived. I called support. My voice was cracking as I explained what happened, but the representative put me on hold for a long time, and I was getting pissed. When she came back, her tone was totally different. "The account associated with that order has been flagged," she said. "It appears the payment method was a stolen credit card, and the account has now been deactivated." I said, "Was it a real address?" And there was a pause. She said, "It is listed as a valid property, however, we can't confirm current occupancy." I hung up with her and drove home, but I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, in daylight, I went out past that way with my friend. I needed to prove it was just some creepy couple, maybe some squatters, anything normal. There was the house. The driveway was completely smooth. My tracks had been filled in. There weren't any other footprints or anybody else's tracks. From what I could see, the porch looked like it was untouched. But that's when I noticed there was a very large real estate sign staked near the road that I hadn't seen the night before. For sale. This place had been vacant since October when I did a little digging. I just stared at that front door, and for some reason it looked smaller in the daylight and less menacing. But I remembered how no warmth had escaped when it opened, how there were no lights on. A feeling came back to me that their hands were super cold, and I thought about how they hadn't made any sounds or chased after me when I ran. As I mentioned, I did a little other digging, and when I checked the county records, I saw that the house had been vacant for 2 months. The previous owner had died in December, the year before. Well, I stopped door dashing after that. And every now and then, I log into my account just to look at my delivery history. That order isn't there anymore. It's not under completed, it's not under canceled, it's not anywhere. But I still have that screenshot of the message that bothers me to this day. I see you. We stopped at a gas station that doesn't exist, by Crazy 3821. We had been driving for almost 4 hours when the fuel light suddenly came on around 1:40 a.m. on an empty stretch of highway in rural Nevada. There were no towns nearby, no streetlights, and barely any signal on our phones. Jake was driving while I kept refreshing the map, but it wouldn't load properly. And that's when we saw ahead of us a small gas station glowing under 2 weak flickering lights. It looked old but functional, just one pump island and a tiny convenience store. Since we really didn't have much choice, Jake pulled in. The price board near the road was completely blank, like the numbers had burned out years ago. And the second we stepped out of our car, the silence felt unnatural. There was no wind, no distant engines, not even insects, just complete stillness pressing against our ears. The door to the store was slightly open, and inside the lights buzzed faintly, and the shelves were half-stocked with brands I didn't recognize, everything looking slightly outdated, like we had stepped into a different year. A man stood behind the counter wearing a faded red work shirt, staring at us without blinking. Jake asked if the pumps were working, and the man simply nodded once. Outside, the pump started without making any sound, and the screen numbers didn't change, yet fuel was clearly flowing into our tank. I checked my phone again, no signal. The time read 1:43 a.m., and it seemed to not have changed the entire time we were there. When we went back inside to pay, the clerk already had a receipt waiting. It looked normal, but the date printed on it was from 3 years prior. Jake pointed that out, and that's when the man finally spoke in a dry, strained voice, saying we weren't supposed to be there that late. Before we could respond, I noticed through the window that an old rusted pickup truck was now parked beside our car. We hadn't heard it arrive. Didn't have any headlights on, and we couldn't hear the engine. But someone was sitting in the driver's seat, facing the store. When we turned back towards the clerk, he wasn't looking at us anymore. He was just staring at the truck. We went back outside slowly, but when we passed by the pickup, the driver's seat was empty. There was no one inside. We hadn't heard any sound of footsteps. Nothing. We got back into our car and drove away without saying a word. And a few minutes later, my phone buzzed as the signal returned. But the time had jumped from 1:43 a.m. to 2:28 a.m. When Jake checked the route history, it showed that we had never stopped there at all. The next morning, I searched for gas stations along that highway and found an old news article about a roadside station that had burned down 3 years earlier after an electrical fire. The clerk on duty had died inside. The photos attached to the article showed the same building, that same single pump, and the clerk in the photo had on the same faded red shirt. My Copperhead Road Story, submitted by Jacob. I'm a little nervous about sending this into your channel, as I don't know if it totally qualifies, but it was a time of life and death and being on the wrong side of the law. I can't say that I'm super proud of the things I'm about to tell you that I've done, but then again, at the same time, it did work out in my favor, so I can't be too unhappy with that. This was a very tense point in my life, with some pretty scary outcomes and decisions that I made. I was in high school in the mid-70s in Randolph County, North Carolina, and by August of my junior year, I was knee-deep in a business my grandfather swore he buried back in 1963. Moonshine. My family used to run it down into Montgomery County back when revenuers still hid tree lines with binoculars. By the time I was born, it was just a story told at Thanksgiving. Usually after my Uncle Ray got into the store-bought bourbon and started lying about outrunning deputies in his Ford with 3 bald tires and only a prayer. But the stories didn't stay dead when I started to worry about how I was going to pay for college. I really wanted to get out of my town. I had 2 choices, the military or college. We were extremely poor. My mother couldn't work as she was always battling illnesses, and my father had been injured in Korea. He was not very high on the military and how he was treated when he got home, and he spent most of his time in a wheelchair. He could get up and around with crutches, but most of the time, he really couldn't get out of that chair. And also, really couldn't get much work. So, we grew up pretty poor, as I said. With my dad not really supporting a military move, college was what I had. I needed tuition money, not high school beer money or gas money. I needed real money. I had been told by my guidance counselor that I would easily be accepted into a number of colleges and universities. He and all my teachers told me my brain was my golden ticket out of life as I knew it, the only way out. One night I was sitting on the porch and my dad wheeled his way out there and said, "You want out bad, don't you?" Then he sat chewing his tobacco. He said, "Well, son, you can earn it." And that's how I ended up in the woods behind our old family land, 3 miles off a gravel road that didn't show up on most maps. My dad told me where it was, and yep, the still was still set up in a hollow so thick with trees you could lose a marching band in there. Sweet gum, oak, pine, dense enough that even in midday it felt like dusk. The copper pot still looked like something stolen from a museum. It had patches and had been soldered all over the place over the years. The worm coil ran through a rusted 55-gallon drum when it was filled with creek water, and it still smelled like sour mash and damp leaves. Back at our house, and without my mom knowing, my dad showed me how to mix the cornmeal, sugar, and yeast, how to test the mash by floating an egg in it, and how to listen to it work at night, the faint burbling like something was breathing in the dark. He repeated over and over, "Don't rush it. Rushing makes poison. You don't want to kill anybody." Those lines always stuck with me. The first time I tasted it off the spout, it burned so fucking bad I thought I swallowed a lit match. My dad happened to hobble out there with me that night, and I had to help him back on his crutches. But when I did that, he laughed so hard he had to actually lean against a tree or he would have fallen on his ass. When he was done laughing, he looked at me and said, "Good, that means it'll sell." We bottled it in mason jars and stored them in feed sacks. And my job next was the run. I had a 1969 Chevy Malibu that Day and Uncle Ray had modified. Now, this was no car show car. This was kind of a piece of shit, but it had heavy-duty shocks and reinforced rear springs. The trunk could hold more than I would ever need to move around. And Uncle Ray, drunk as he was, did work on the engine and had the motor purring like a kitten. So, my route was laid out in front of me. It would wind down into Montgomery County through back roads lined with tobacco barns and abandoned farmhouses. My dad knew a number of people down there that were still interested in buying this stuff, mostly small-time bar owners who liked cash-only inventory and never asked questions. The first few deliveries I made went smooth. Kinda too smooth. That's about the time when I learned about the Carters. Yeah, that's not their real name, but I'm using it here. The Carters were still in the shine business. They had been for years. And there was a mean bunch of people in that family, even the women. The word always was around that they'd buried 2 people who tried undercutting them in the early 60s, though nobody could really prove it. But around where I lived, couldn't prove it usually meant, yeah, everybody knows. So one night I was at a bar near the county line, and a skinny guy with a beard like Spanish moss came over to me while I was unloading jars from my car into the back of the place. He just said, "You're the Miller boy, huh?" And I dutifully said, "Yes, sir." He grinned without warmth and just said, "Son, you're on somebody else's road." Then he turned around and walked away. At the time, I didn't really know what he meant. When I told my dad about it, he just spat his Copenhagen into his spittoon and said, "Fuck them. They don't own asphalt. You keep doing what you're doing." That was easy for him to say. He wasn't the one out there on the road. And at this point, this is when the scary stuff started. About a week later, I was coming back from a drop when headlights flicked on behind me, coming out of the middle of nowhere. My heart skipped a beat, but there was no siren and no lights. Just 2 trucks and their headlights. But my stomach still tightened. They stayed back at first, and then they kind of crept closer. And then one finally pulled up alongside me. I caught a glimpse of Mossbeard in the passenger seat, smiling like he'd found a deer clear in his sights. The first shot shattered my rear window. Glass exploded everywhere inside the car, all over my neck and shoulders, and I ducked on instinct, just gripping the wheel. Another shot blew out a taillight. I did the only thing I could do. I hit the gas. The Malibu roared like it had been waiting for this moment for years. Gravel spit behind me as I took a curve faster than I ever had taken one before, but the trucks followed. Again, I could hear shots and bullets were cracking against metal. I took another chance and swerved down an old logging road I barely knew, and the branches whipped by the side of me. One of the trucks tried to follow me down there, but he fishtailed it in loose dirt, while the others stayed on. As I was panicking, I remembered one of my Uncle Ray's favorite pieces of advice. If you can't outrun 'em, outdumb 'em. There was a narrow creek crossing ahead, and I knew that it would just have flat stones and mud, so I hit it at full speed, just praying I'd get through it. But the tires caught, slid, then grabbed, and I busted out of the other side and cut hard left into the trees, into a forest I was more familiar with. The truck behind me tried the crossing, but it didn't make it. I heard the splash and then a metal crunch. Me? I didn't stop. When I got home, Dad saw the bullet holes in the shattered rear window. He didn't look too surprised. "We're not going to tell your mother about this," he said. And I said, "Jesus, Dad, that's the least of my problems." But he nodded and said, "Yeah, it's escalated." And that was his fucking word, escalated, like this was some kind of schoolyard argument. But I kept thinking about college. We doubled on production after that. And looking back, I think that fear made us kind of greedy. We figured if we were already targets, we might as well make everything worth it. But the woods suddenly felt different after that shooting. Every snap of a twig made me jump. And while the mash fermented, I'd sit with a shotgun across my knees, staring into the trees that seemed to just be staring back at me. To be honest, I started to feel like a fucking hillbilly. But one night, as the still dripped slowly and steady, and clean, I heard voices. Not close, but close enough. I killed the little lantern that I had, and moonlight filtered through the branches of the trees. I crouched next to the still, my heart hammering itself, and I saw two silhouettes moving along a ridge off to my side. I heard one voice whisper, "It's here somewhere," and my mouth went dry. If they found the still, that was it. If it was the cops, it would be years in prison. If it was the Carters, well, fuck, I don't know what would have happened. I had no idea who was out there, but they were moving closer. Then I remembered an old wasp nest that hung low over a trail that came down towards the still. I waited until I thought they were walking near it, and I picked up a rock and threw it in a Hail Mary style. And goddamn, it hit. The nest burst open like a paper bomb. The screaming that followed was almost comical, but I was in no mood to laugh. I was pretty shaken up. But I saw those two silhouettes run, swatting and howling away, and I bit my hand to keep from laughing out loud. But that was the last funny thing for a long time. 2 days after that, my Uncle Ray's barn was burned to the ground. There was nothing accidental about it. You could still smell the gasoline even though the ashes had cooled. My dad suddenly looked older and weaker than he had in years. I said, "Dad, I think we need to end this now." He knew how much money I had to go and said, "Kid, let's take a chance, one more run. One more big run." It was the biggest load we'd ever done, 60 gallons worth, every jar we could fill. I knew the payday would be big enough for 2 years' tuition, and then some. I didn't sleep the night before, and the drive down to Montgomery County started quiet. There were no headlights in the rear view, and there was no movement in the tree lines. And somehow, that made it worse. Halfway to the county line, a log lay across the road I was on, and I braked hard. Before I could throw it in reverse, 2 trucks burst from the trees behind me, and I knew immediately it was the fucking Carters. Shots began to ring out immediately. I had my window down, and I heard a bullet whiz right past my ear. I slammed the gear shift into drive and rammed into the log, and it rolled just enough, and my beat-up old Malibu lurched over it with a sickening crunch. One of the trucks had come up so close it actually clipped my bumper, and I floored it again. The road was twisting like a snake, but I was familiar with it now, and I drove faster than I ever had before. Every curve, tires squealing, the engine screaming out of its mind. Everything was screaming, including me. Another shot tore through the driver's side door, and splinters of metal stung my arm. I wasn't thinking about college anymore. I was thinking about getting out of this shit alive. Up ahead, the road narrowed along a really steep embankment, and I knew if I fucked up here, it was a long drop into the rocks and trees. These guys were still shooting at me, and I reached under the seat and grabbed a pistol my dad had insisted I carry. I had never shot at a person before. I rarely went hunting with my family. But this time, I stuck my arm out of the shattered window and squeezed off 2 blind shots from a .38, directly behind me. One truck swerved, but the other one kept coming. And then fate, or maybe just bad driving, intervened. The lead Carter truck tried to overtake me on an inside curve, and the gravel gave way. The rear tires slipped, and for a split second, the truck hung sideways. I locked eyes with none other than the moss-bearded man. That was when the truck went over. It rolled once, twice, even over the sound of my vehicle and the engine. I could hear metal folding like paper. I mean, the sound was fucking unreal. Crushing, tearing, and final. The second truck braked too hard trying to avoid it and slammed into a tree. And after that, there was no one following me. I drove another mile before pulling off the side of the road, shaking so violently I could barely breathe. I opened up the door and puked all over the road. Later, we learned that 3 people died in that wreck, the moss-bearded man included. The driver of the second truck was driving solo, and he survived, but I know he lost a leg. The craziest thing? Nobody ever connected it to me. Around here, accidents happen, in quotes, especially on those back roads. But at the end of the day, that night, I made the delivery. The bar owner took one look at my car and didn't haggle on the price for once. I took a long way home, avoiding that road, and when I got home, my dad met me on the porch. I just looked at him and said, "Dad, it's done." He again looked at the bullet holes in the car, the cracked windshield, the shattered window on the passenger side, and the blood on my sleeve. He nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, son, it's over." The next day I went out into the woods by myself and tore the still apart. I smashed all the copper and buried what I couldn't burn. I knew I was going to be on my way to college in a little while, and moonshine had paid for my escape. I mean, I look back now as an old man and think about how easy it would have been to roll along with that truck, to become another story told over cheap bourbon and exaggerating it with time. Yeah, the shine paid for my escape out of that town. My mom died not long after I went to college, and my father passed on about 6 years later. Yeah, the shine got me out of that town, but it also nearly killed me on a road between Randolph County and Montgomery County in North Carolina. These are stories I don't tell my kids. I met my wife in college, and she just knew I was there because of my brains and hard work ethic. Only my wife knows. I'm not like my Uncle Ray, making stuff up. It's kind of a part of my life I don't want them to know about. Maybe in good time I will tell them. But right now, I feel it's best that they don't know that portion of their dad's life. Thanks for reading this if you do. Free Trip to Maine by Nomocow. My first year of college, I made a close friend named, for sake of anonymity, Neil. We got super close, and eventually he asked if I wanted to go on a week-long vacation in Maine. As someone who had never been to Maine, I was excited to visit. It was a fun several-hour drive, but as we got closer, the mood slowly began to shift. Cities became less frequent. Tall pine trees crowded the road and swallowed the sky, and though it was peaceful and relaxing at night, the silence felt too deep, like it was pressing in on you. While we were up there, we did edibles quite often at night since there wasn't much to do. We'd hop in our canoes, drift across the dark water, and try to fish, and just sit watching the lake breathe under the moonlight. We were supposed to carry lights at night, and more importantly, we were not allowed to be on the water after dark. So when we saw boats in the distance, we assumed they were patrol and lowered our heads, hiding low inside the canoes until they passed. One night, we decided to paddle out to a giant island in the middle of the lake. Knowing we weren't allowed to do this, we carefully and quietly docked our canoes inside thick bushes along the shoreline and tossed our belongings in the boats. Neil put his flashlight inside his canoe, and I tucked mine underneath my shirt. As we docked, Neil said he thought he heard footsteps that weren't ours. I shrugged it off, and he did too. A narrow trail cut into the woods, barely visible in the dark. We stepped slowly and carefully, trying not to snap twigs beneath our feet. Then, almost instantly, the entire trail lit up. A search boat swept its lights through the trees, beams slicing between branches and freezing the woods in stark white flashes. We stopped moving and hid quickly behind some trees, barely breathing. Then we heard it again. Footsteps, not ours. Neither of us moved. We stared at each other as the sound repeated, single, deliberate thuds shuffling through leaves and brush. Our hearts dropped and seemed to stop in our chests. If we moved, the boat might catch us. If we didn't, whatever was in the woods with us might. We waited for the boat's light to drift away, then sprinted as fast as we could back toward our canoes hidden in the bushes. I followed Neil's exact foot placement so that we wouldn't stumble. And just as we were about to reach the shoreline, that damn boat light swept back towards us, flooding the area. We dove into the bushes and stayed perfectly still. Lying there on our backs, we heard the footsteps again. Leaves crunching, branches brushing, and something moving through the woods. And the scariest part? They were getting closer. I gripped my metal flashlight like a baton, knowing whoever came around a tree and bush we were hiding behind was going to get it. The footsteps became unmistakable, stopping only at the entrance from the trail. And they grew louder and closer. At the same time, the boat approached again, its engine humming across the water, then suddenly growling to life and speeding away into the darkness. Relief washed over us for a split second. Now we were alone with whatever else was near. The steps closed in until they felt like they were 5 feet away, just around the tree. We knew our only option was to run. There was no reason to confront this when we could escape with our canoes. As quickly as possible, we dragged our canoes out from the bushes and down to the shoreline. And right as we were about to paddle off, Neil froze. "Wait," he said. "I'm missing my flashlight." Knowing he had put it in the boat, he began frantically searching while both of our hearts pounded in our ears. After what felt like forever, he looked up. The flashlight sat perfectly balanced on top of a rock, centered, upright, like someone had placed it there carefully. Neither of us had put it there. We grabbed it without saying a word, shoved the canoes into the water, and paddled hard across the open lake back towards our camp. To this day, we have no idea what the boat was searching for. But whatever it was looking for, it probably wasn't looking for us.
Danger on a Dog Walk, submitted by The One That Got Away. This story is from my mother-in-law. I turned her on to your podcast. I helped her recount and construct this story based upon her harrowing account. She wanted a degree of anonymity, hence The One That Got Away. I'm writing to all the beautiful women who love to walk their dogs. Always be aware of your surroundings and never take anything for granted. And please, carry some type of mace. Had I practiced what I'm preaching, this life-altering story that I'm about to share may have never happened. Last year, I went to the dog rescue pound and found the cutest little terrier dog that I thought would make a great companion for me because I live by myself. I named my new companion Shadow, and I thought this was a perfectly great name for a little dog who would be accompanying me when I would take my walks. I'm very fortunate because I have a job where I'm able to work out of my apartment and spend a lot of quality time with Shadow. We really bonded over the next couple of months and became a team. 3 times a day, Shadow and I would go for walks, and we enjoyed every minute of it. We both got the daily exercise that we needed, and after our walks, I had a bright, fresh new outlook for the day. I taught Shadow some words that triggered his responses, such as, "Would you like to go for a walk?" To which he would run to the door and grab his leash. When we got back to the apartment, I would say, "Shadow, do you want to play?" And when I said this, it put him in a wild frenzy. He just barked, jumped up and down, and would not stop barking until I found a toy and started to play with him. On August 10th, this all changed for both Shadow and myself. On that day, it was late in the afternoon, right around dusk. I asked Shadow if he wanted to take a walk, and of course he grabbed his leash and brought it to the front door. Our daily walks began by walking to the park and taking the stairs that led to the park all the way to the bottom, where there was a bridge and a little stream that flowed and ran alongside the park. The Shadow and I descended the stairs and headed towards the bridge. We noticed another man walking a dog, and he was coming up the stairs and was soon going to approach us. I didn't think much about it. I mean, every day there would be people walking their dogs up and down the stairs just like Shadow and I. When the man came within about 5 yards of me, I felt something was off. The way he looked at me, the way he walked, something just wasn't right. As the man and his dog were passing me, I smiled and said, "Good afternoon," and continued to walk towards the bridge. As we got nearer to it, I turned around and saw the man had turned around and was coming down the stairs and was heading in my direction. When he was about 10 feet from me, that's when I saw his eyes. His eyes had a crazed terror in them, and I became scared for my life like never before. I became temporarily frozen, and I just prayed that when he walked by me, he would keep going. But once he was next to me, he pulled out a knife and held it against my side and instructed me to walk with him over the bridge and to walk along the stream and not to say anything or even think of screaming. If I did, he said he would stab me repeatedly and push me into the creek. I'd hoped Shadow would have growled, but he was such a friendly dog and had not yet developed instincts of danger. I guess he was just excited to walk with another dog and didn't sense anything unusual. Unfortunately for me, there were no more passers-by or people out enjoying walks along the stream anywhere near that I could look towards and make some type of facial expression to indicate that something was wrong. Instead, I had to focus on everything the man had said and continue to walk in hopes that someone would come along. As we continued to walk along the stream, Shadow was just fascinated by all the squirrels, rabbits, and fish. For Shadow, it was just another walk as we normally took. About a quarter of a mile down the stream, the man told me once we were over the bridge to walk onto the right side and to look straight ahead. When we crossed the bridge that I was very familiar with, we started to walk up the cement path. Off to the left, there were some trees that blocked all the homes that were along the road about a quarter of a mile away. As we walked up the path, we stopped midway and made a sharp left turn and headed to the trees and brush. As we headed towards the direction of the trees, I saw a small pup tent erected and what appeared to be a little fire pit in front of it. The tent was so well hidden that you couldn't see it from the pathway and probably not from the road or by the nearby homes. As we got closer to the tent, we had to go step into the stream, cross over, then walk up a little bit of an incline to get to it. Once we were there, he told me not to move or think of running or I'd be floating in the stream within a minute. He took my dog's leash as well as his own dog's leash and secured them to a tree about 6 feet away. He then turned and faced me. He told me to get down on my hands and knees and crawl into the tent and to not think of doing anything stupid because he would be right behind. I crawled into the tent and the first thing I saw was a dirty sleeping bag laid out and some Polaroid photos of other women that he had next to the sleeping bag. Alongside the sleeping bag, he had marine rope, duct tape, zip ties, and various other things that my mind couldn't process except to know that these were weird things to keep me there and harm me. He instructed me to sit there as he sat right next to me. He wanted to know what he should call me as well as how old I was. This was followed by how often I walked and if I had a boyfriend or husband that would come looking for me following on the path. I assured him that my boyfriend was probably already looking for me and taking the same way I walked every day. It would just be a matter of time before he would find us. He then told me if I just kept quiet and didn't say anything, he would let me go when the time was right. As he looked at me, he told me he just wanted to get to know me. As I turned away with disgust, I looked out of the tent. The sky had already turned dark, and it would make it difficult for anyone to find me. As I stared at all those pictures, my instincts were telling me that he had most likely sexually abused these women, or worse, killed them, and my photo would be among them shortly. I knew I had to do something, but I knew physically he would overpower me and my options were very limited. Screaming was out. I knew the outcome of that. But right around then, I could hear Shadow crying. He sensed that something wasn't right because I wasn't by his side. The man told me to tell Shadow to shut up or he was going to kill him and throw him into the stream. I sat there panicking, not knowing what to do, and the thought came to me to say the word play. Anytime I would say to Shadow, "Do you want to play?" that's when he would begin to bark and jump until I came to him with a toy. It was then that I yelled out, "Shadow, do you want to play?" The word play instantly triggered a response from him that would save my life. When he heard my voice, he started barking uncontrollably and running back and forth on the leash. The man immediately became visibly petrified by this and told me to make him stop, but I told him he wasn't going to listen. The man peeked his head out of the entrance of the tent and tried to quiet Shadow down to no avail. He then decided to get closer to the dog and throw him some food in hopes of stopping the barking. And that was my moment of opportunity. I had noticed a utility knife next to the duct tape. I grabbed it and tore a slit down the middle of the back of the tent and crawled out of it and started running as fast as I could. As I ran, I knew that there was a clearing ahead, and I screamed as loud as I could in hopes that somebody walking or someone from one of the homes would hear me and try to find me. I knew I had to run and not look behind me in hopes that he would hear my screaming so loud that he would give up trying to chase me and would try to get away. I ran scared, trying to navigate my legs in between the trees and clearly looking for an opening. I was screaming at the top of my lungs as if there wasn't going to be a tomorrow. And within about 3 minutes of running up the hill, I saw lights, and I heard a man's voice yelling back to me, "Hey, are you okay?" It was then that I felt I was going to be saved. As I continued to run and scream, the light became brighter, and I could see the man standing near the trees next to a house waiting for me to come out. As he got closer to me, he extended his arm and grabbed me. He sensed that I was terrified by something or somebody. He just grabbed me and proceeded to walk me up to his home. And as he was doing this, I looked over my shoulder, and I didn't see anyone behind us. Once in his house, the man summoned his wife, who assisted me in sitting down and got me some water, and immediately got on her cell and called 911. As I tried to recall what had happened, the couple was in disbelief to think that there was a tent within 15 yards of their property that nobody knew was there. They looked at each other in surprise and wondered how long it had been there, and how nobody else had seen the tent or this man. As I told my story to them, they were horrified as if it had happened to them. I could see that they were noticeably shaken up while they locked their doors waiting for the police. About 5 minutes later, the police as well as an ambulance arrived, and I told the police my story. They immediately put out an APB with a description of the man that I gave them. Soon several squads arrived, and after listening to the description of where the tent was, they began to walk into the woods, flashlights in hand, as well as a canine. As I recounted the story to other police officers who responded to the call, the rescue squad was taking my vitals. They were afraid I was going into shock. They loaded me into the ambulance, and off I went to the hospital, begging the police to find this man, but also to find my shadow. Once at the hospital, and a police officer by my side, they had me hooked up to IVs and assured me I was going to be okay, at least physically. About 30 minutes after I arrived at the hospital, one of the officers acknowledged a call on his radio that my dog Shadow was safe. However, there was no trace of the man. But once I heard that my dog was safe, I drifted off into a deep sleep and didn't wake up for probably 7 hours, I was told. Once I woke up, several doctors and nurses were by my side, and the police came back to interview me again, and I relived the nightmare from start to finish, as they sat there in amazement at how he could have been so close to houses and people walking along the path and no one ever seeing him. They began to share with me some of the answers to my questions. I asked about the Polaroids that were next to the sleeping bag when I entered the tent, and if any of those women were local and were still alive. They didn't have the answers I so badly needed to hear right away, but they told me that as we were speaking, they were working on it. They explained that going by the pictures wasn't easy unless they had a name to go with them, and they were cross-referencing names of women who had been recently abducted, raped, or murdered in nearby areas. They were also checking DNA on the sleeping bag and various things throughout the tent to see if it would offer any clue to this guy's name or any of his prior victims. When I inquired about how this man had been back in the woods with this tent set up, they had no answers for me. And if they did, it probably would have been one I didn't want to hear. They told me that the man who kidnapped me most likely had an escape plan and that he had to have had a car nearby in the event that he had to leave quickly. Given the area we were in, there were trees and no cameras that could have captured his image leaving the park. A few days after this happened, I was released from the hospital and reacquainted with my dog Shadow. When I wrapped myself around him, I cried hysterically, thanking him for barking and getting excited when he heard the word play. For several days, the police department came and gave me updates and asked me more questions that I truly couldn't answer about that night. As the weeks went by, the man was never caught. I knew that Shadow and I had to relocate so we could live normal lives and not be in fear while going for walks. I'm thankful that Shadow and I did relocate so we can continue going for our walks during the course of any day. Now, I have my cell phone and pepper spray that I carry along with me everywhere I go, with Shadow or without. What became of the man or the pictures of the victims that he so proudly displayed near his bedroll, I do not know. I've moved hundreds of miles away and have lost contact with the police department by my own choice, so I don't have to live in fear that he's still out there looking for me.
Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.